we talk about the Titanic syndrome, which is some of the things that sank the Titanic besides the iceberg. Remember, the iceberg was there before the ship came, and it was there after the ship sank. But on that fateful night when almost 2,000 people lost their lives, there were some other things at play. For example, did you know they were getting warning messages from passing ships?
No.
They said, iceberg in your path. And the response went something along the line, get off our frequency because we're busy sending messages for the first class passengers. Because the radio operators got paid for the messages that they sent. That was their wage. So that was an inability to recognize that there's a new and emerging reality coming. We see that with institutions today. The other thing in that Titanic syndrome is the keys for the binoculars was locked in a glass cabinet. So the folks in the crow's nest on lookout duty had no binoculars. I think one of them survived and was asked what would have helped you, and he said a set of binoculars, but nobody broke the glass cabinet to get the binoculars because the prevailing view at the time was this thing is unsinkable.
A warm welcome to episode 9 of the Parallels podcast. It's brought to you by Africa Scotland Business Network, an international business network connecting African member companies and organisations to Scotland and back, and increasingly across EMEA regions. The Parallels podcast brings you the top leaders who work with and for our member companies in Africa, and today we have got the absolutely incredible Gary Graham of the 3isGroup in the studio with us. Gary, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, Claire. Thanks, and thanks for having me.
If you want to find out more on Gary's work, check out 3isGroup.coza. Gary, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah. I think the other place to check out what we do is just go to LinkedIn. It's a little bit more relevant, more
popular,
more up to date, because it kind of gives a flavor of the kind of work that we're involved in. Yeah, so good to be with you. I think in terms of what we do, I'd flavor us as kind of a niche business reinvention agency. That's the essence of what we do. So there's some consulting in there, some advisory, some coaching, but the sort of core of the work that we do is helping individuals, organizations, businesses, big and small, to figure out how to turn disruption and chaos into opportunity, so that they're not sort of in essence overwhelmed by the amount of disruption that we're having to experience.
Gary, can I ask a question for the benefit of those who are watching or listening today? You are involved with business reinvention.
Yeah.
Can you explain what the difference between reinvention and change is in terms of how businesses look at those two words and what that could mean for them?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great question. I'm happy to, but I'm going to give you a question if you don't mind, just to create some context. So between, and this is just going to be a test of your sort of gut response because you might not have seen the data, but between 2011 and 2017, the amount of disruption, sort of from a meta view, let's call it that, across geopolitical, tech, climate, it's an index tracked by Accenture, rose 4 times. Yeah, so if you take an average week, it meant between 2011 and 2017, your emails were 4 times the amount of emails. Your client complaints were 4 times. Everything went up by 4 times. That's the level of disruption. So take a guess how much it went up during 2017 and 2022. What's your gut feel?
Another 50%? Really? Was
Incorrect.
Right? Oh.
You are the weakest link. Goodbye. What's quite interesting, but also quite scary at the same time, it went up 200 times.
Wow.
which means on average we're experiencing 50 times more change and disruption than we did 5 years ago. So if you want to get a sense of why most of us are feeling quite fatigued and tired and maybe a little bit overwhelmed, and we're juggling so many balls and we just can't find time even for the great ideas, we just have the sort of limited energy and bandwidth even to execute on that. This index, and there are a couple of data points around this, gives us a good sense of why. So that gives you an idea of the amount of change and disruption that we are experiencing, which means, sort of begs the question, how do we respond? How do we respond in a way that is not a one-time project? That is not, if you think of what happens in business with teams and organizations with groups of people, most of us don't like change. We're kind of hardwired for certainty. We don't like disruption. We prefer a measure of, if I wake up in the morning, I want to know the person I love is still there. When I come home at night, I want to know that house that's still heavily mortgaged is still there. We look for predictability. And so change is not something that comes naturally to most of us. There's a huge difference between enjoying change and enjoying variety. They're two different things. I remember in our early days in 3i's, we did everything, and one of the things we did was recruitment. And so the two lies that people tell you when you're recruiting them is number one, I love people. You say, why should you come and work at ASBN? I love people. And then 3 months later, you're like, wait, I must pick up these bodies from all this, these people that have been loved so much here by this person. But the other sort of lie, which I think people also told themselves, is, I'd love to work here because I love change. It's just not true. And the reason for that is most of us have not developed a system for being responsive to change. Now, there's the approach of being, I can wait for it to happen. In other words, I am disrupted. So think of what happened with COVID as an example. Or there's a boat stuck in the Suez Canal, or there's some port disruption, or there's some unrest. Think of all these different types of disruptions we've experienced of late. So there's an event and I'm disrupted, and then I respond. There's the other sort of side to that coin, which is, can I be the disruptor? And to play in that space requires a particular kind of mental model, a way of thinking. But it's not just about the right mindset. I mean, if you physically fit, you're involved in sport, you're an athlete, and if we think of something simple like somebody wanting to lose weight, I don't know if you've met anybody who's gotten thin by sitting around and thinking about it. You can have the most fantastic vision of what losing weight looks like. It requires some kind of action, but for that, people need tools. And so this is where reinvention plays a role. It's about a mindset, but also a method and tools. It's about building a system of reinvention so that you, let's call it regularly. The expression that Nadia likes to use is, we all need to take a shower regularly. Otherwise, we start to stink. So in business, it's also about regularly taking that shower. Might it be our prices we need to wash off? Might it be our approaches to marketing, our way we staff, the way we package products, the way we execute? So reinvention is about helping businesses or organizations build that system for timely reinvention, which means you're trying to get your people to start seeing change as an opportunity to reinvent, rather than as a pain, a drain, and a strain.
I've known you quite a long time, Gary. Over a decade, to be precise.
Wow, I didn't realize it's that long.
Yeah, it's about 13 years now. And I've learned a lot from you along the way. And one of my responses to being able to cope in business with change geopolitical factors, mega factors that can really, really have detrimental effects on smaller business, was to actually start a second business.
Yes.
So we started Africa Scotland Business Network with quite an idealistic and romantic view that if we could start a business network that could be this like beautiful big asset, evolving asset of businesses, not just from South Africa, not just from Africa, but up into Scotland.
Yeah.
Now we've got a huge footprint across EMEA regions. And imagine if they could connect immediately to each other. It would have a unifying effect where people like yourself as a member could reach out to someone in Scotland or someone in Mozambique or someone in Botswana. For me, that was something that I knew I had the skills to do that. And that was my response. And thankfully, all good businesses, they need a logic model, they need a commercial model. And it's something that I have also learned from yourself. So we obviously put those models into place. And here we are. ASBN now has its own podcast where we're able to interview leaders like yourself. But our members are also potential customers for ASBN.
Yes.
So right now, we're getting consultant from Gary. I'm actually taking part in your Reinvention course. And it's been really interesting being in this global cohort. I want to understand, because you do consult to leaders both in Africa and now all over the world, is there a different set of challenges that people in Africa endure compared to other parts of the world? Or do you see that there's a universal challenge system?
I think that's a really great question. Perhaps the short answer to that is context matters. There's a golden thread of I would say challenges, or maybe what I would call sort of delinquencies that run through entities. So if I take entrepreneurs, for example, it's something I learned from the early days in cahoots with people like Max and Pascal and Kino, in those early discussions, that entrepreneurs need three things, essentially. And it doesn't matter which market they're in the world. It's all around access to capital, access to market, access to skills and talent. And part of that skills and talent is a mindset, yeah? But the solution that you're going to bring to the entity is going to be determined by the context. If I take the African context, I mean, we do some work for it's not our client base. It's delivering content and coaching for the Center for Creative Leadership, CCL. They're partnering with the Gates Foundation, and it's about shifting the impact of public health across the African continent. So the target audience there is public officials in health. But if you look at the challenges, for example, in healthcare, it's the same theme across Africa. If we look at corruption as a major challenge, it's the same theme throughout Africa. But the nuance of the context is maybe what differs. And so your solution has to be packaged based on that context. And I'll give you, one of my favorite examples is if you're selling insurance, the cheapest color car to insure in South Africa, apparently from the experts, I don't know, they've told me this, the cheapest color car to insure in South Africa is a white vehicle. Yeah? But if you're going to North America, the most expensive color car to insure is white. Why?
I'm not sure.
It's because of the weather. It's because of the snow. So white is high risk. Yeah. So if you're moving from a South African context where you sell insurance and you're now opening up in North America, you've got to be mindful of that context and then package accordingly. You cannot apply the same set of rules to a different market. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
There are definitely some golden threads in terms of challenges. If you take this aspect of disruption, it's affecting us all. It doesn't matter where you are. The nature of the disruption might vary from country to country. In some places, it might be more economic or geopolitical. In other aspects, it might be more climate or something else for that matter.
Gary, can we just home in on you as a business leader, Gary Graham, and it just for the benefit of anyone listening who wants to search for Gary on LinkedIn, it's Graham, Graham.
That's correct.
And not the Scottish way, Gary, which is Graeme, but that's okay.
Yes, but apparently I believe there's some Scottish heritage. The digging that I could do, apparently somewhere back, way back in the family line, was a great grandfather that escaped Scottish prison, apparently, and found his way to South Africa. So
there you go.
Yeah, but it's Graham.
There we go. Yeah. So Gary Graham on LinkedIn. And if you are listening or watching, please subscribe to the Parallels podcast right now. We've got Gary Graham in the studio with us. Gary, tapping into you as a businessman who is in demand for your services, your consultant services. How do you spend your time and how do you manage an increasing client base? And are you in a position to choose your clients? I'm sure you are. How do you choose your clients?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. Look, we've been around. 3i's has been around since 2005. So we're almost 20 years old. But I started trading informally, doing some consulting work while I was working full time. I had a very progressive CEO who said to me one day, please go and help my management team on the wine farm. This is a guy called Trevor Stradham, and the farm was Audacia. It's still there in Stellenbosch. And that was his side business. And I ended up not having any leave left because I was using all of it to do the side work. So we've been going for a while, and yeah, in the beginning we did everything. We were everything to everybody. We took everything that came our way. 3i stands for 3 individuals that decided to do work together. That's where the name comes from. And yeah, I think over the years we've gotten a little bit more focused. So we've gone through a reinvention, I would say, every 3 to 4 years, where we've refocused on what's the emerging need in the market. It's translated into a different look, which you've helped us with on the branding side. I'm very proud of the logo and the website. And so I think that narrowing of focus has kind of got us to a place where we can say that piece of work is for us, or that for us these days, it's not just about the work, it's also about the partnership with the client. There's a great fit. Sometimes there isn't really a good fit from a values point of view. There's work to be done, but we know, this client system is going to be abusive. We're going to be pulling out the last of the hair that we've got. The fit's not right for us. And sometimes, when you're going through a dip as a business, you kind of look back and you think, maybe we should have grabbed that. But I normally don't dwell on that for more than 10 seconds or so, because when we see the pain that other consultancies are experiencing, we're quite happy with the choice. So the thing about how we choose work is we've been very fortunate, and I'm exceptionally grateful for this, because I know many of our counterparts are not in the same space. We saw quite a few associates having to just shut doors during and post-COVID. For us, it was our busiest period ever. We had the first sort of 3 months where everybody kind of held back and they didn't want to spend money on anything. And then it just took off like a rocket. And in many ways, I think the work we started doing with the Reinvention Academy in late 2019, pre-COVID, was kind of preparing us for a new reality. Clients would be looking for new tools, different ways of thinking. They're sort of frustrated with many of the approaches that they'd been so-called tried and tested models that weren't working. But for us, the fortunate thing the thing that I'm grateful for is probably 99% of our work has come from referral over 20 years. Zero cold calling. Probably I'd say maybe less than 1% actually comes from the website, but it comes from referral. And then most of the work tends to be more sort of partnership retainer type work, where we're walking a bit of a journey with the client system. It's maybe a year, sometimes longer, maybe 4 years. I think is about the longest we will go before it's kind of time to say, okay, it's time for us to step back, and then they need the next thing now to take them to the next level. But within that, I think there's a set of criteria that's important for us. Is, we and I've got to get the phrasing right. We work to live, and not the other way around.
I love that.
Yeah, which is very important. I think we're all made up of much more than what we do for work. And my personal challenge is I love it so much because, we come into a system we can see shift within 10 minutes. And then think about the performance shift, the culture shift that you're able to see in a year, 2 years, 3 years. So it can get quite seductive, that to a sense where I love it so much I do it for nothing, and that's the danger. I've been at burnout before in the days of Future Fit. I don't know if you remember.
I do.
The big Future Fit drive that was sponsored by the then BOE private clients, which is now Nedbank Wealth. There's such a big demand in that entrepreneurship space for that kind of work, and I burnt out. It took me the better part of 4 years to come back from that. It was so bad that I shut the website down. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. People were banging on the doors. We need more. Here's money. We need you to run more. And I just couldn't. So I think for now we're at a space where we keep it tight. We're very small. The business is run by Shirley and I. Shirley's actually the MD of the business.
Shirley's your wife.
Shirley's my wife. Just for the record, yeah. Which has its own sets of challenges, but also its incredible opportunity. And the business has its proper place. It's an enabler for other things. But in size we're quite small. But the associate pool is probably in the region of about 30 people at the moment. And if I take the sort of expanded through the global reinvention network now is in excess of 200 people that we can draw on, depending on the nature of the the project or the client need at the time. Yeah.
Gary, do you have a client or a project that stands out for you as perhaps a favourite, or somewhere where you've made incredible impact and it just stands out for you in your career?
Sure.
I'm sure there's been many.
That's a really good one. I think the ones that are sort of currently on the go, I can't mention their names without their permission. There's some of them that are sort of still fairly, I won't say secretive, but people don't want to let the cat out of the bag because it's, in a traditional business sense, it's still sort of competitive edge for them. But I think, some significant projects for us have been one where we were asked to hack HR, as an example, HR function in a global, a multinational entity. The request was specifically the drive was actually to take the cost out of the business. And in this case, it was between 7 and 8 million that they wanted to take out, in terms of costs. And it was a quite a painful project. So, change doesn't come without pain. But I think the success for us is kind of getting the system to a point where they recognize there's a different way of doing it. And that's the beauty of reinvention, is not it's not throwing everything out. So when you're innovating, there's a distinction between innovation and reinvention. So when you're innovating, you're starting from scratch. When you're reinventing, you're discarding what doesn't work for you anymore, but you're taking what is working and then building on that and making that better. And I think that is, if I look back on projects and even projects now that are successful, the success for me is twofold. It's the business performance shift, number one, because they look at ROI, that's a key measure. But the other one is the personal shift. So when people come to you and say, this thing changed my life, or somebody says, if I had this 5 years ago, I would have saved my marriage. When they start translating that learning into personal transformation, I think that's a big reward, for us.
That's so interesting, and I can relate to that. You mentioned in your previous answer about businesses reinventing every 3 to 5 years. So Africa Scotland Business Network, and let me remind everyone that we're not publicly funded by government or an association.
Yeah.
We are a privately held business. We're an entrepreneurial business network owned by myself and Nicola, who have our first company, Africa Scotland Business Network, as our second. And during COVID, it was also the year we formed in 2019, at the end of 2019, 3 months before COVID. And the COVID period over those 2 years was our quickest growth.
Yeah.
We're 4 years in, and we've got to know ourselves. We've got to know our groove. We've got to know what works, what doesn't work. We've got to even understand what types of businesses are happy in ASBN.
Yeah.
Who we align with, how our values are aligned with other businesses. And we have learned to say no to a few companies, not a lot. Most of the companies that come into our realm who are interested in joining ASBN, they see what we are, they see our brand. We're very, our digital presence is pretty prominent. Our LinkedIn, our website, which is www.africascotland.network, FYI, right through to our human team, which is based in Cape Town. We've learned to understand how we can help people, what our value is, what our purpose is. And it's almost like it's unfolded beautifully, and it still is unfolding. And that means being honest and saying to the very few companies that we've had to experience this with and say, you know what, we actually can't help you. And it saves so much time trying to force a relationship that's never going to work. Now, thankfully, companies that do come to us, they are the right companies. They see our messaging, they see our brand, they see our presence, as I've just said. So it's usually a match. And because we are a cross-sectoral business network, we want that mix. We want that diversity from, leading entrepreneurs like yourself. We've just interviewed Zahim Sufi from Dentons, from the biggest law firm in the world. So we are this beautiful mix, but we're still learning. And I'm absolutely sure that in the next 3 years, we will probably have to reinvent ourselves again.
Yeah.
And it's thanks to your input and your knowledge that we host that in our brains. It's in the back of our brains. Never sit still. Be ready to reinvent at any time.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting to kind of watch our cycle of change and growth and innovation.
Yeah.
Much like you've just said, that is a universal, it's a universal system where companies from all over the world, it is like a 3 to 5 year, okay, you have to check yourself.
Yeah.
before you wreck yourself. So
I mean, it's interesting you should mention that. I mean, the data is quite clear that there's some sectors and some industries that are having to reinvent a lot quicker, 12 months or less,
oh wow.
just to stay relevant. So we're talking about just to survive, not just to thrive. You know, it's interesting. Look, the thing that kind of stands out for me about ASBN and you and Nicola is that for me in the beginning, it kind of felt like this was an experiment. Yeah, we're going to test this thing. There's a hint of something there. Let's kind of test it and see where it goes. Oh, wow. After a couple of months, man, this thing's got legs. You know, it wants to walk. Let's now add a bit of body to it. And I think that's part of the formula. You know, there's no silver bullet to this, but it's about finding the formula that works for you. Yeah. As opposed to, well, let's go and copy and paste something from somewhere else and see if it's, because your context is different. I mean, you're a network with diverse needs, diverse expressions and diverse intentions. And that's the trick around the beauty of experimentation is the sort of counter to that. We often talk about the risk of making decisions. In the current state of volatility, if I've got to make a decision, it normally comes with some kind of heaviness to it because, damn it, what if I make the wrong choice? How am I going to recover? So what we notice happening is that the fear and anxiety actually shoots up. Now, you know what happens when you're having to function from a place of anxiety. It's not ideal. It's not, you're not unleashing all the creative juices. So what we advocate, which is what I see you doing with ASBN, is, and everything are events. And you're trying this, then you're experimenting. You're seeing what lands, and if there's a sort of MVP, minimal viable product or solution idea that works, let's stick with it. And what happens when you're experimenting, the fear and anxiety goes down. There's a lightness to it. You're more creative. And once you've run a few experiments, you've now got the data. You said the formula works. Let's rinse and repeat. And it creates that bandwidth to then explore other stuff. But when you're operating from a sort of heavy space of fear and anxiety, you kind of limit. So that's been really good to see in your journey. It's quite beautiful to see the experimentation coming through. Now, then we're trying this event, we're trying this kind of engagement mechanism. I'm sure there's been some stuff that you've dropped because it hasn't worked.
There has.
Whereas traditionally what we do is, we made a decision and we put so much money into that thing, so now we have to make it work. We can see in month 24 that you've got to cut the damn thing, But because we're so vested in there, or it's somebody's baby, we don't want to kill it. And that's the beauty of, I think, of experimentation. Is something we advocate for, businesses all the time.
We've got data now, Gary. So when you first start something like a business network that you want to take overseas and make much more global, even though we are first and foremost focused on Africa. That's why Africa is the first word in our business. Yeah. It's Africa first, okay? Then we built out into Scotland and then out into EMEA, which is so exciting for us. When we first started researching what was out there, we could see what other networks were doing, but see, to find data on network businesses, it was really hard. So we couldn't even learn from, you can go on YouTube and there's a million people who are talking about how to start a fast moving goods business.
Yeah.
You don't have that when it comes to, you don't have that knowledge in the public sphere. But now that we're 4 years old, like you said, we've had to experiment, we've had to innovate, we've had to reinvent along the way. But now we've got the data, and it is so empowering because we can go back and see, right, that didn't work, that worked. And then you just build on the projects and platforms that are working.
Yeah.
Even this podcast was a bit of an experiment at the start. And it's very kindly produced by Clyde Broadcast in Glasgow. They're one of our member companies. We're not podcast experts.
Yes.
But we knew we could brand this thing beautifully. We knew we had access to interviewing fantastic leaders from our member companies. We knew that we could use studios anywhere in the world. So we knew that we could make this happen. And thankfully, it's an experiment that's worked out. This is episode 9, ladies and gentlemen. So I wanted to ask you, Gary, to what extent are you using data to fuel your guidance on reinvention to companies all over the world?
Oh, very, very much so. I mean, it's one of those key components of the formula. In Reinvention, we talk about a 7-pillar framework, and data features very prominently because it helps us with the core of the model is being able to anticipate what's coming, then being able to design according to that, and then implement. But you can't do the anticipation part of change if you don't have the data. Yeah. So data's core. So, and part of that sort of regularly taking a shower is not just what's happening globally, what's happening in the sector, and what's happening in the industry, but in client companies, what's happening in their specific. So if it's in retail, what's the emerging trends in retail? You know, if it's hospitality, what's likely to come at them that they're not seeing? So data features quite heavily. I think the challenge for us as business owners is the amount of data out there is actually quite overwhelming.
Right.
So part of the discipline, and this is also an opportunity to any of those of you that are kind of work in the data space, is kind of being able to package that in a way that makes sense for a particular sector. When I know there are companies that specialize in that already, give you the highlights, and if there's something that grabs you, you can go a little bit deeper there, because there's just a mountain of information out there.
I'm going to digress from our script. Yes, we do have a little bit of a pre-planning script. Any good podcast does. Is there a company that you have seen out there, not necessarily a client, but is there a company that didn't reinvent where you were thinking, if they did reinvent, they'd still be alive?
Where do I start? So I mean, so they're the well-known examples. I think we use in a lot of the business dialogue. Nokia, Blockbuster, Kodak. Some of them got killed by their own technologies and their own innovations. But if I want to bring it sort of closer, particularly in the South African context, we need look no further than SA Post Office, SAA, and of course a lot of state-owned entities who tend to be sort of stuck in a long cycle way of thinking and planning and doing things, even a long cycle way of doing strategy and budgets. It was relevant 20 years ago, but the same models don't work now. I think of crowds like EdCon, even locally, and the stacks and stacks of examples. I think there's a graveyard of entities that we talk about the Titanic syndrome, which is some of the things that sank the Titanic besides the iceberg. Remember, the iceberg was there before the ship came, and it was there after the ship sank. But on that fateful night when almost 2,000 people lost their lives, there were some other things at play. For example, did you know they were getting warning messages from passing ships?
No.
They said, iceberg in your path. And the response went something along the line, get off our frequency because we're busy sending messages for the first class passengers. Because the radio operators got paid for the messages that they sent. That was their wage. So that was an inability to recognize that there's a new and emerging reality coming. We see that with institutions today. The other thing in that Titanic syndrome is the keys for the binoculars was locked in a glass cabinet. So the folks in the crow's nest on lookout duty had no binoculars. I think one of them survived and was asked what would have helped you, and he said a set of binoculars. But nobody broke the glass cabinet to get the binoculars because the prevailing view at the time was this thing is unsinkable. So arrogance. Yeah. And then the first officer on duty, William Murdoch, who at the last minute gave instruction, I don't know the correct nautical terms, but for the ship to do this, instead of this. He was famous for averting disasters like this. He'd done one previously with another ship, I think it was called the Arabica. But what he did was he applied what he did before. So it's a reliance on best practice. Yeah, that's the three components of the syndrome: arrogance, an over-attachment to past successes, and this inability to kind of see that there's something new and emerging. And if you take those three, today you'll see either all three or a combination of them in this graveyard of institutions that either refuse to recognize a need to change, or maybe recognize it too late. Because that's the other thing. Sometimes, a system can kind of get overwhelmed by the inertia of it. It's just too much, too heavy to shift. And that can also get overwhelming.
You're listening to episode 9 of the Parallels podcast, brought to you by Africa Scotland Business Network. If you want to meet over 400 leaders from over 100 member companies across Africa and EMEA regions, just like Gary Graham that we've got in the studio with us today, please log on to www.africascotland.network. You can even contact myself directly, Claire at africascotland.network. Gary, we're going to round this fantastic interview off with quite a big and deep question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Gary, you are born and bred in Cape Town. You're a passionate South African. You're passionate about Africa. What excites you about Africa, and why do you continue to stay here and work here?
I think, so I've always been vulnerable to relocating geographically, and with family and roots here, that's always been a challenge and a risk for me. But I love working and playing globally, and equally I love coming home and seeing that mountain as that plane comes in. But I think if I look at the African continent, and certainly we've probably done assignments across about 13 different countries at the moment, which is still fairly small. It's not even the tip of the iceberg. But the opportunity in the diversity, number one, because we know that innovation is less likely in homogenous groups of people. So if you have a group of doctors together, you'll get a limit to the ideas they generate versus if you throw in the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. And I think Africa presents that richness of opportunity. There's also something about and I don't have a word for it, but it's just like we make stuff happen. We just kind of get on with it. I felt for a long time that when I was in corporate that the average South African manager kind of undersells their capability and what they bring. If you look at the spectrum of issues you have to deal with on a daily basis versus what people deal with in the rest of the world. And I think if you go into Africa, that sort of same thread runs through. So that's one of the things that excite me. So we have really top-class, world-class capability and talent across the continent. Yeah.
Gary, thank you so much for your time.
I want to add something.
Of course you can.
If I can, which I think is, I'm not sure that you may recognize in your research around what you're doing with ASBN. But a quick context on this. I think all the data around us indicates that globally we're beckoning for some kind of new world order. Yeah. Things are on the decline. The monetary system is collapsing. Our ways of looking at things, designing things, is we're kind of having to review. And I'm thinking specifically of how we create opportunity and how we create access. I suspect one of the things, because it's what besides you and Nicola, that attracted me. I signed up because of you. Because there was no network in the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. There's a network now. But I said, well, this thing, I believe in this. I think this is going to give us access. But we're not in this network for what we can get out of it. We're in this network for what we can give to it.
Interesting.
And I suspect if you go and ask the bulk of your members, you're going to find a similar thread. I think that's pretty unique. There are not many networking sort of platforms that create a space for people's benevolence. And the world is calling for that. The world is calling for this less attachment to IP, less attachment to outcomes, less attachment to, this is my patch. I mean, it's half the reason why we're in the nonsense that we're in globally, is because of a sort of over-attachment to this is mine, There's nothing new under the sun. And I think what you've, in a pretty cool way, have created here is a space for benevolence. It's a space for people to be of service, for people to give. In a way that, in most cases makes commercial sense. You've been able to monetize that, which is fantastic. So I think don't underestimate that. It's I just thought of that while you were talking. Because I was thinking, like, why the hell am I here? Why am I in ASBN? I'm not here for clients.
Well, but if I can be.
Well, I don't need to be, is the point. I mean, does Denton's need to be in this network for clients?
No, but we help them, and that's an interesting point, because a lot of people have asked me, you've got so many multinational companies and big corporates in your network. Why are they there? I'm like, well, they're full of people who want to be connected.
That's the point.
We do it for them, and that's what we do really well. Yes, we've got to use technology because we're an international business network to cross borders quickly. But at the end of the day, we're human connectors, Gary.
Yeah.
That's what gets me out of bed every morning, because I go to work and I thrive given my skill to connect people meaningfully to one another. And we've connected Dentons to XYZ.
Yeah.
Don't be fooled.
But it's not the intention. They don't sign up with. For most of the business that I look at, the intention is, so what am I getting at? I think the old order and way of thinking about this is we network for what we can get out of it.
It is, but that's
the new way of thinking has to be we network for what we can give.
Yeah.
And what we get just,
is a bonus.
It's that old thing of if the hand is closed, nothing can come in. But if it's open to give, it invites. And then the numbers take care of itself. But it's not our intention. If I meet people at an ASBN event or just meeting in the corridor now, we don't go, hey, here's the business card. Hey, we must talk. Let's see what we can do together. No. It's like, hey, let's grab a coffee. Let's get to know each other. That's very different to our intention with networking 10 years ago. And I think you've hit something golden there. So keep it up.
Thanks very much, Gary. I'll take that.
Yeah, use it.
In fact, Karen, can you just note down everything Gary said? Frame it in a testimonial and let's put that on LinkedIn. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not actually. Gary, it's been an absolute treat to have you in the studio. If you want to meet more leaders like Gary, or indeed Gary himself, feel free to connect with the ASBN team. They will make sure that we share Gary's details with you. Gary, stay connected. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't change. I know you're in the business of reinvention, but don't reinvent yourself, because we totally love you to bits. Stay connected, stay warm, everyone, and we'll see you on Parallels Podcast, episode number 10, shortly.